This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 419, entitled Masculists Expect Feminists to be Biconscious. Description. This flyer claims that as masculist ideas spread, those feminists who remain monoconscious will be seen increasingly as being dumber and more narrow-minded by both sexes, as masculists teach women to become biconscious, as well as teaching women to hate monoconscious fluffy feminists for creating young women's babylessness, since it is the monoconscious fluffy feminists who have taken over the divorce courts and made them so toxic for men that young men refuse to give young women their sperm, because young men refuse to face a 1 in 4 chance of being financially crucified and stripped of custody of their kids by these courts. File itself. Maybe a bit bigger. Masculists expect feminists to be biconscious. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Masculists expect feminists to be biconscious. If they're not, then masculists will increasingly accuse monoconscious feminists of being MFBs, that's monoconscious feminazi bigots, and harangue them angrily out of the room. Masculists are fed up with the unending tirade of the feminists against men, when, as masculists know, it is women who vastly out-oppress men, since women's oppression of men is continuous, lasting decades, particularly women's manslavery of men. To make this point clear and vivid, imagine a feminist sitting on a chair with a masculist standing over her with a gun to her head, telling her that she has 3 seconds to make a choice or he will pull the trigger, blowing her brains out, literally. M for masculist. Quote, "You have 3 seconds to choose between being raped or being a woman slave to a man, working for him for 3 decades without being paid, with no kids. If you don't choose in time, I will pull the trigger, starting now. 1, 2, 3. Bang!" Her indecision cost her her life, so I will answer for most women who do not take the choice seriously. Most women would rather be raped, since a rape is a once-off event lasting minutes, whose negative effects heal over time, whereas being a woman slave to a man, working for him for decades without pay, without kids, is so much worse, hugely worse. So most women would prefer to be raped rather than being manslaved, and in brackets, and not be shot for not responding in time. At the time of writing, March 2021, masculist ideas are too new for most feminists to be even informed of what masculist ideas are, so they are inevitably monoconscious, that is, they have only had their feminist consciousness raised, so are ignorant of what the masculists are saying, so tend to have traditional expectations of men, seeing men as cash machines. Quote, who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies, expecting to be able to parasite off the money and labour of men, so she can sit on her fat, parasitic ass raising her kids in a middle-class house that he pays for. Most women don't understand the concept of manslavery that the masculists are constantly harping on. For most women, it's simply the norm the age-old norm that men pay for women to help women raise kids. Most women don't even question this tradition. Many men are the same, usually labelled blue pillars by the Masculists and MGTOWs, brackets equals men going their own way. That is, men who refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves, due largely to the toxicity of the divorce courts, taken over by the hated fluffy feminists, and made so toxic for men that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for men, so that modern marriage is now such a shitty deal for men that in many countries 2/3 of young men live the MGTOW lifestyle, refusing to give young women their sperm, because they refuse to face a 1 in 4 chance of losing their kids and being financially massacred by MFB, divorce court lawyers and judges. Close brackets. In the movie The Matrix, to take the blue pill means to stay in the matrix, that is, remaining deluded that you are living in the 20th century, being fed signals directly into your brain by the intelligent machines of the 24th century who have conquered humanity, using humans as batteries for the machines. To take the red pill is to choose to become aware of the bitter reality, that is, that humanity has lost to the machines. To Masculists and MGTOWs, taking the red pill, by analogy, is to become aware that women are manslavers, parasiting off the money and labour of a man, manslaving him for decades, leeching off his time and energy so that she can have him pay for her to raise her kids as she sees it. This attitude of fluffies takes its most blatant and oppressive form in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, which see men merely as cash machines to be robbed and abused to the point that one father in 4 is financially crucified, ruining his life. Masculists claim that women oppress men hugely more than vice versa. So when feminists keep harping about men's oppression of women, Masculists get really antsy and lash back at these MFBs, telling them that it is women who are the major oppressors because fluffies and fluffy feminists are manslavers, a hugely greater gender crime. To Masculists, fluffydom is manslavery, in brackets. A fluffy, based on the word fluff, is a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man by not bothering to FIP up, in brackets, that is, become a FIP, where a FIP is a financially independent person who bothers to get a career competent education at high school and college so that she becomes a FIP as an adult and not a fluffy who expects to pull her financial weight and not expect to leech off the money of a man. To Masculists, to have one's masculist consciousness raised boils down to seeing fluffydom, that is, being a fluffy, as manslavery. Masculists see manslavery as slavery, which is something to be hated. So Masculists have a hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists and aim to wipe them out by totally ignoring them, forcing them to rot on a shelf so that their fluffy parasite, that is manslaving, genes are wiped from the gene pool, thus effectively exterminating them slowly. Masculists see themselves as the 21st century equivalent of the 19th century abolitionists in the northern states of the US, who hated slavers of Negroes in the southern states of the US and eventually went to war against them in the US Civil War over the issue of Negro slavery. To the abolitionists, slavery was a war issue. To the Masculists, manslavery by fluffies is also a war issue that will cause fluffies and fluffy feminists, that is, in brackets, that is, feminists who still have fluffy expectations of men, seeing men as cash machines to be robbed and abused in the hated, that is by Masculists, fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, close brackets, to be wiped out in a sex war, forced to FIP up or be exterminated by being totally ignored by men. Masculists have a hatred of fluffies for their manslavery. Masculists have an even greater hatred for fluffy feminists, since it's bad enough that these feminists are fluffies and hence are manslavers, but they are hypocrites as well, since they want equal rights with men in the parliaments but reject equal obligations with men by behaving as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, expecting to extract money from divorcing husbands for decades, with no obligation on the fluffy ex-wife to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up. When a masculist hears some monoconscious feminist lashing out at men for some way that men oppress women, in brackets, and biconscious masculists, by definition, do not deny that men oppress women. You only have to read the feminist books to see how men have oppressed women over the centuries, close brackets. He gets very angry and disgusted at the level of monoconscious ignorance of the monoconscious feminist, knowing, brackets, having had his masculist consciousness raised, that women oppress men hugely more with their manslavery, etc., than vice versa. So he reacts verbally violently against her with a masculist tirade that usually takes somewhat of the following form. M, that's masculist, bashing back at some male bashing feminazi. Quote, "You women oppress men far worse than vice versa, with your decades-long man-slavery, your financial parasitism, your fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, your many decades-long gender crimes against men, your profoundly hypocritical rejection of the paternity rejection right, when you women have the maternity rejection right. Your complaints at how men oppress women are small potatoes in comparison to what you monoconscious fluffy feminist hypocrites are doing to men. We masculists are fed up with your misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi bitchery, so when we come across it as masculists, we beat you at your own game by haranguing you feminazi bitches out of the room with a masculist tirade delivered with a level of male verbal venom that you females cannot compete with, since we men are smarter than you women at the top end of the scale, and with our 10 times greater testosterone levels in our blood, we are hugely more aggressive than you women. The more you monoconscious feminists complain at masculist verbal attacks against you, the more contemptuous of you we become, and the more verbally violent, since you sound so hypocritical to us. Your feminist complaints against men are rather minor in comparison to ours against women. You fluffies and fluffy feminists are manslavers. That makes you slavers, so you are severely punished by the masculists for your much greater gender crimes against men. This is the end of part 1.